Thanks for joining us. I'm Cait, Sarazin, the Senior Content Manager at WWCode. And today we have Daphnée Jeune with us. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Doing great. So you are a software engineer at New Relic, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And you just started about 4 months ago. So what was that process like trying to find a job during the pandemic?
Boy, it was one for the books. But I guess I'll run you through how that all came about. So I used to work for this company called Motion Point. They're in the website translation business, and I was there for about a year up until March of last year. I reached a point where I wasn't really satisfied with what I was doing, and I wanted to really pursue software engineering. So in March, I decided to quit the job and learn React JS. And a week later, the pandemic blew up. So it was like, oh, what did I do? But I just really wanted this one thing, and it was to be a software engineer. And I spent the next 6 months just in my room, studying 8 to 12 hours a day. And in September, I started applying like around August, September, got the first interview with Urelic, and that's really how it happened.
Wow, that's amazing. That's lot of long days, it sounds like.
Scariest
And
thing I've ever done.
scariest?
Yes.
What was scary about it specifically?
Well, the fact that the pandemic happened a week after I decided to call it quits with Motion Point.
Oh, gotcha.
you
Okay.
know,
Yeah,
yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah.
Is remote work new for you, or have you been working remotely for a minute?
We had the options of being remote back at Motion Point, but it wasn't fully remote. I would say like on average, twice a week I would work from home and then be at the office most of the time.
Got it. So what's that? I assume you're fully remote now, so that's a bit of
Yes.
a transition. What's that been like in terms of starting a new job and like trying to like build relationships and get what
Yeah.
you need? Like, how has that process been for you?
Yeah, that was definitely a worry of mine. But folk at Neuralics are so great. We have like they give us a space to actually socialize. So on a weekly basis, we have team time where we get to either play a game or just talk to each other. We get to talk to other teams every now and then as well. It's definitely not the same thing as being in the office. I definitely miss the interaction and just actually being there. But they do a great job with, I guess, bridging that gap with being able to talk to each other during these times.
Definitely. And when you were going through the process of you were learning React, you were spending all this time studying, and you
Mhm.
finally get a job. Do you have any ideas in terms of like what skills or what set you apart in the interview process that allowed you to get a job?
Honestly, that's a question I've actually been wanting to ask because I was really surprised I did get the offer. I really would like to know from them, but if I were to say, it's a good question. I'm not sure because I know they talked about either my portfolios, and I remember talking about the resources I've used in my interview in my during the interview process. So I don't know if it was a fact that I was self-taught, which probably proved that maybe I could take something from scratch and do something with it. But I really couldn't tell you concretely what it was. I do want to know though. I should probably ask that question.
Yeah, it could be hard to judge from your own perspective as far as like what made it for you.
Right.
So you had a quote on your Instagram. Always remember, it's always too soon to quit. Whether you're applying for a job or can't figure out that bug, don't let up. So how did you manage to like keep going? Like that's really intense to be able to study that much. So what drove you to keep going forward?
Um, it's just a matter of like always remembering why you're doing it and what you're after. One thing that always kept me going is I had mentors. So I had a tutor through the experience who would like guide me every now and then, and like when I was blocked in my projects would come and help me out. And knowing that he also was in my shoes not too long ago made it very real for me. Like, okay, I could be in his shoes not too far from now. And also the fact that like I just really wanted to be a software engineer, you know. It's been a dream of mine for a couple years, and I know that that's just something I wouldn't want to settle on, and I didn't want to stop until I got there.
Awesome. That's really inspiring to hear. Um,
Thanks.
you dealt with, you talked a little bit about fear before, but so how do you overcome fear, whether it's when you're diving into the unknown or like dealing with imposter syndrome?
Well, yeah, this that's a big one. So first, fear of the unknown. It's just I feel like now that I'm kind of out of that experience, it's always scarier than it seems is the one thing that you always have to remember. The unknown, it's scary because it's unknown, but once you're on the other side, you're like, oh my God, like this is what it was. And you're like, it was scary, but it's not as bad as I thought going into it. So that's one thing to always keep in mind when you're approaching, you know, an unknown situation. In terms of imposter syndrome, I'm just now getting over that hump 4 months later. And it still happens to me every now and then. But one thing I do that really helped me is because I used to be scared of asking questions in case I something stupid or maybe they'll realize I like they made a mistake hiring me. But it's like, would I think that of someone else? Like if I was a seasoned engineer and you asked me a question, I wouldn't think you were stupid, or I wouldn't think, you know, you don't know what you're talking about. It's just a question. So for me, it was a matter of like always remembering, okay, if I were to ask myself that question, what would I think of me? So that really helped me with like, okay, just relax, just ask a question, just say this one thing, just do this and see what happens. It won't always be what you think the reaction is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think a lot of times with like what you're talking about, like asking a question or making a mistake, there's this fear of getting it wrong, even though that's
Right.
really crucial to learning and growing is getting it wrong. There's still a stigma around it, meaning that you're not good enough or that you don't know what you're doing when it's really part of the process. So that's
And
really
that's another thing too that you just said. I so far I've learned the most while making mistakes, because you learn the most through debugging, you know, the
Mhm.
books you create. So you want to make those mistakes because these are the best learning opportunities for you to understand your code base, understand the lines you wrote, and understanding why something is happening. So you just can't you almost want to look forward to these times where something breaks because that's when you grasp the most out of it.
That's a really like radical idea though, like looking forward to it breaking because there's so much like trepidation, especially like as a when you're earlier on in your career as a software engineer. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
it's broken. How do I fix it? And there's all this
Yeah,
anxiety. So that's a really cool perspective to think about, like being excited when it breaks as an idea of like a learning opportunity.
exactly. It's all a matter of shifting your perspective, looking at it from a different angle.
Yeah, yeah, that's really great that you have that perspective. Um, with
Took me a
that,
while.
yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of like making enough mistakes that you start to realize, like, oh, you can't really avoid this, and trying to be perfect isn't attainable, and just causes all this anxiety, and
Yeah,
doesn't, yeah, it's just not possible. So,
yeah, yeah.
definitely a hard lesson to learn. Are there any women in history or in modern day that are in tech that have inspired your career or your life?
Any women in tech? Um, you know, it's funny you asked me that. So my cousin, her name is Beatrice. She's a business analyst, and the way she got into it, so she was also trying to find her way in tech, and she wanted to be a BA. In one of her interviews, they've asked her to demo a software that she wasn't familiar with. So she used the last 15 minutes before interview to get familiar with it. And she was able to actually not only demo it, but also teach them also, some parts of the software. And she got the job. So, and I always found that so amazing because it's like just because you don't know something right then and there, you tend to want to give up, but you might not want to go the extra mile to give yourself that chance to potentially get the opportunity. You know, don't, I guess in her experience, I've learned that don't be your own obstacle. Let the no be told to you as opposed to telling yourself no. And that's something I've had to learn. And I always think back at that story and be like, wow, like if you were able to learn something in 15 minutes, then I should be able to at least give myself a chance to learn something myself.
Yeah. Wow. That's really amazing and inspiring to think about being able to move that quickly. Thank
Yeah.
you for sharing that. Any other advice that you have for women in tech?
Women in tech, your voice matters. And that's one thing I subconsciously struggled with in my first job, and even this one, but not as much. I remember in my first meetings, whether it was stand-ups or just like or little meetings and whatnot, I was always scared to suggest something, or because my first job it was mostly men, and I always felt like I'm new, I'm a woman, and I probably don't my opinion probably doesn't weigh as much, but it does. It does. You should never let these factors weigh on you this much where you feel like your voice, your opinion doesn't matter. And we belong. We've broken barriers before, and this isn't anything new.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you so much for being here, Daphne. It's been really great, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. I've had a pleasure talking to you and sharing some of my knowledge.